That's very good. Okay. We're just transferring. Oh, I see. Actually, we're trying to get YouTube Live to come back on. Oh, good. We've been trying to make sure that everyone could see all day long wherever they were. We've got some people apparently over on the East Coast who are watching, like in their office and that kind of thing. Okay, so we're set. So we're going to be moving on. Oh, we're not set. We're almost set. Are there any other things you'd like to share, Emily or Jack, or Patrick?
I think we're good.
No, you're supposed to help me stall for time.
Oh, okay. Jack, you're up.
Oh no. Okay, I think we did it.
Throwing me under the bus there. I see.
Oh no, we got the most important question. This guy's sixth generation in the company. Wow, Arthur, that's
That's
awesome.
crazy.
That is a real legacy. I mean, that's like better than the Rockefeller family. Um, so cool. Well, it's great to have your participation.
Thank you very much, Sean.
Oh yeah. Well, yes. Thank you. Yay! Woohoo! Um, with that, we're muting and we're unmuting Xavier. So, Xavier, can you tell us if you try out, say hello to us? Xavier, you were unmuted.
Hear me?
Almost?
Hello?
There, we did it. Good job.
Okay, cool. Okay. Good
Hello,
afternoon,
Xavier.
everyone.
So, your briefest introduction, Xavier is an inspiring leader in the passive house movement in California. He has just done the first retrofit of a passive house in Los Angeles. He has a career in technology as well. He and Pierre, in some ways, share that background. They're both French, and that's not the only thing, of course, but they both have this background in technology where they became really sophisticated in thinking about systems and then have applied that deep knowledge to the residential and built world. A helpful transfer of expertise there. So with that, Xavier, please take it away. Just tell me when to change your slides and I'm here for you.
Okay, thank you. So next. And first, I'm very impressed with the quality of all the people presenting, and that's a great conference. Thank you, Sean, for organizing that. First of all, I would like to let you know why I've got involved into the passive house movement. That's the picture of the house that we did in France. It took us 5 years to get a building permit. It was complicated with neighbors. And we built that house, finished it in 2008, and I discovered passive house 2 years later. And that was a huge frustration. And I was so disappointed that I felt I messed up, that I decided that my next house was going to be a passive house, and that everybody should know about it, because what was the most frustrating part is that no one told me about. And I think that's what the key point I want to mention today is that everybody should be informed and everybody should have a choice. And my feeling is that if much more people will know about it, much more people would do it. Next. So first, I don't know, I heard a lot of high qualified people and very informed about high performance building, but just to refresh memories, or for the people who don't know about it, the passive house standard is the leading international low energy design standard in the world. There are more than 40,000 buildings, and of all kinds, and all around the world. And on the left, on the right, sorry, you have a New York building, which is the tallest passive house building in the world as of today, which was certified last September. So when you think about passive house, it's not only single family houses. Next. So when you look at the passive house principles, really, it's quite simple. I mean, if you would compare that with a car, you basically would want a car which starts every morning, where the window closes, and which doesn't leak oil. And apparently, it's kind of different for buildings, which I don't really understand why. But anyway, the 5 principles is the first one, that you insulate all around the house, including the floor. You have high efficiency windows and shade, especially in Southern California. You have continuous ventilation, which should be required in any house anyway, for good indoor air quality. You have an airtight envelope, because today, with the survey which were done in California, basically every house has a window open 24 hours 7, whatever is the temperature outside. And the last one, which is to minimize thermal bridges. And when you look at those, they're quite, they make a lot of sense. Next. So when you have those principles and that you're doing your design, after you load all those data into a great tool, which is the PHPP, the Passive House Planning Package, which is the design and energy tool for Passive House. And you will do all your energy modeling, all your load calculations. And it will, in the last version, which was released in 2015, you also have the renewable energy and solar panel calculation. So it's an all-in-one software, and you get all the results that you need out of it. Next. And so the goal in the PHPP is to meet with the passive house criteria, which are for the heating demand 4.75 kBTU per square foot per year, or a maximum heating load of 3.17 BTU per hour per square foot. It is the same thing for cooling, except for cooling, the Passive House Institute allows extra cooling demand for dehumidification. Like in Florida, actually, the cooling demand max will be about double the standard value. The third criteria is the air change power at 50 Pascal. Should be less than 0.6 per hour, which is for my house, we're going to talk about later. It's about a hole which is 6 inches by 6 inches. So basically you have a pet door open all the time. And also it takes in consideration not only the heating and cooling loads, but also the total energy. And basically, in a nutshell, the Passive House standard requires an EUI max of 15 kBTU per square foot per year. So next, so when you look at those when you look at those numbers, they probably are easy to understand for a lot of people, but if you have some people who are not so technical, let's look at what, for example, the heating load looks like. Next. So if we, next. Basically, if we look for a 1,000 square foot house, what it means is that we're able to heat up, to keep warm a passive house, which is a 1,000 square foot house with a blow dryer, just to put it in perspective. Next. So I moved to LA from France 2 years ago, and we're looking for next house, and that's what we found. And my wife told me, "Are you crazy? That's we don't want to buy that." I said, "That's perfect. That's perfect to do a retrofit for to do a passive house." So the way it looks today. Next. So basically, that's the house. We kept the same footprint, and we added one story and changed the outside a little bit. But that was the perfect opportunity to do a deep retrofit and to include the passive house strategy in doing that. So since it was the first one in California, it was a bit scary, and it was also my first passive house. And so did work for about a year to look around, to ask questions. Never enough questions. So next, let's. Also, what I want to mention is that you may like or may not like the house that we've done. What's important to know is that the passive house standard is really design free. So that's why actually we need a lot of good architects to do good looking passive houses, because really you can do anything. Next. So the step one that we've done for house in terms of insulation, which is not that far from Tittle 24, we have R38 roof insulation. We have 2 layers of batt insulation for the wall, R15 and R13. And the reason we did that is that we have the airtight membrane in between the two, and we're using the second layer of insulation as a technical cavity. And the crawl space as R21 insulation between the floor joists. Next.
Xavier, I apologize. Could you explain again why you added R13 batt? You said technical, and then I just couldn't make out the next word. Could you just elaborate a little?
Okay, a technical cavity, technical space to run the, because the goal is to minimize all the penetrations.
Ah.
So that's where what we've done is that we have only one conduit coming inside the building for the electrical, and then all the cables are running inside the house.
So you have a layer of insulation that's all messy because, you know, it has to go around stuff. And then you have a layer of perfect insulation on the other side of a vapor barrier.
Exactly.
Cool. Thank you.
To minimize thermal bridges and to add that extra layer of insulation that you need to meet the passive house goals. But once again, you know, the goal is to meet the numbers, the 4.75 kBTU per square foot per year in terms of heating or cooling. And you can do it with any kind of wall assembly. The way we choose that one is because we had a very narrow driveway. And so we did not want to expand the walls on the outside. The exterior insulation is probably the safest way to do it, especially to minimize thermal bridging. It's not always possible, but any solution works, especially here in Southern California. It's very tolerant to reach those goals. Next. Thermal bridges. It's building with wood is not as critical as what it would be with steel framing or with masonry. Still, the goal is to try to insulate as much when you have all the connections, especially at the floors and the connection between the wall and the roof and the stores, the stairs, stories. Sorry, just to avoid more mold and heat transfer. Next. Number 3 was quite critical because for Southern California, we don't need triple pane windows, or I mean, you don't necessarily need them in typical installation. You may want, if you reduce your wall insulation, you may have to, but that's not something that you have to do. And but it was the tricky part to find not just the performance, the glass performance, but to be sure to have airtight windows. And I think there is a lot to be done in that area, and also to have a lot of shading and awnings or outdoor blinds. That's the critical point here in Southern California. Next. The main difference with a standard building that we are the standard buildings which are done in LA and Southern California is the airtight barrier, and I must say that it was the most challenging part. First of all, because I wanted to be innovative and to be as affordable as possible, and I didn't choose the right product, so that's one thing. But also just to train the people, and you never spend enough time to train people. And I guess French is not necessarily the right language to train the people in LA, and Spanish would be much better. And but we did it. So we have that continuous membrane which goes on the walls and the floor and the roof, and we tape the floor OSB as our floor airtight barrier. And the detail on the left is that when you train, the contractors, and when the electrician gives you seals a perforation like that, you're happy and you say, next job, that electrician is going to work with me. And many blower door tests during construction because after it's too late. Next. Regarding the air tightness layer, I mean, there are many ways to do it. The spray, the plastic spray like Prosoco is one. The membrane is another one. Concrete is another one. The OSB, there are controversy about it. Is it airtight? Is it not airtight? But you have some with a membrane on it, it comes with it, or you have a peel and stick membrane. So that's basically the different solutions that you can use to make it airtight. Next. Continuous ventilation. Once again, that's the only way in a house, passive or not, to keep the CO2 level and the indoor air quality good for the occupants. And that shows, the graph between a standard window ventilated house in blue and the continuous ventilated house in orange. And the goal is to stay below the 1000 ppm, which does not happen often. Next. Just a comparison between our house and Tittle 24, which was a 2013 version, but there are not many differences in that part. But basically, what I was surprised with is that Tittle 24 gives you the type of insulation you need to use, and not the R value that your wall need to have. So you can read here the R values for each one of the walls. And just for the air tightness, we were not able to reach the 0.6. We're still going to be able to qualify as a passive house retrofit because we are below 1.0 for the air change power at 50 Pascal. And that was a big relief because that was the most stressful part. Next. So if you compare to Tittle 24, we have basically a minus 64% reduction in terms of heating and cooling demand, more for heating than cooling. That's so even in Southern California, and that's was the goal to demonstrate it works. Next. A book was published and it's available on Passive House California website for free. Where you have a study between the Tittle 24 and the Passive House standards with a comparison in the different 16 climate zones. And it shows that you have a 39 to 83% energy reduction applying the Passive House standard. Next. So we moved in about a month ago, and already I can tell you that our pets feel pretty good, as you can see on the picture. What's amazing is that it's more quiet. In LA, we have a lot of helicopters flying all around, and we don't hear them anymore. It's more comfortable, no draft. Temperature is very steady. The indoor air quality is amazing. Even my mother, who came to spend Christmas, she did not feel like she needed to open the window in the morning to air out the bedroom. And we're waiting for our first electric bill. But since last week, we have our energy modeling, energy monitoring system working, and we've been net zero. But I'm going to talk about that. But we're already net zero for the first weeks of the last 2 weeks of January. Next. Let's talk just about the passive house standard classes. Up to 2015, it was only certifying the building envelope, and taking in consideration what needs to be done and the renewable energy that we need to include. Passive house included 2 new classes: the plus, which is the let's say the net zero equivalent, and the premium, which I will call the carbon zero equivalent. Next. And the reason for that is that you have, when you design a house or any building, if you look at the energy production, you will produce a way bigger part of your consumption, of your production during the summer part that you will use during the winter. And looking at the storage for the long time storage as about a 30% efficiency. So basically you need to produce 2.5 times more energy than what you're going to use if you want to take in consideration the storage. Next. So our house is going to be the calculation that we did in the PHPP showed us that we're going to be net zero with only 10 solar panels. We actually find some space for 2 more solar panels just to be on the safe side. And since we're getting an electric car, it's going to be used for that. And
can I clarify, how big are the panels themselves? Like how many watts, or what is the kilowatt rank size?
Okay, there are 320 watt panels from SunPower.
Oh, so you have like a 3.2 kilowatt system then, if you have 10 of the panels and they're 320 watts?
We have 12. We have 12.
12.
It was designed for 10, and I mean, just to be on the safe side, we did put 12. And but we so far so good.
So a little shy of 4 kilowatts. That's excellent for a single family home.
Yes, especially because house was presented, a net zero house, same size as a reference in LA with 30 solar panels. So we can do much better than that. And just saying that we don't have any gas, so it's induction cooking, heat pump water heater, heat pump air handling unit, so no fossil fuel, so it's 100% electric. Next. And just if we would have done the house according to Title 24, we would have it would require 5 more solar panels, and actually the roof would be too small for to meet the net zero standard. Once again, full electric, not TDV. Next. So basically, that's what our net zero should look like. And first of all, we should take care of the building envelope. Next. A little bit about the cost. I need to do some work about it, but basically the price difference for in Southern California to do passive or not passive, you have the smallest difference in price than what the different options that you have for your floor. And the floor option that you're going to choose is going to have a bigger impact on the price than doing passive or not doing passive. And just if you look, the highest cost was the windows, and I think something can be done there. The insulation doesn't cost anything.
No,
and the soft cost, of course, but the solar panels were smaller, and the HVAC units, it's running with a 1-ton unit. Yeah, Sean, you wanted to ask something or to tell me something?
Oh, pardon me. No, I think I was, sorry. Nope, I'm unmuting myself.
Okay, just so less than 5% for the first passive house in LA. So that's there is room for improvement, and it's definitely not excused to go that way. Next. If you want to know more, the Passive House website, Passive House California website, where you can actually download the free ebook about the first passive houses in California, or the latest one, because it's been going on for a while in Northern California. We are having certified passive house designer and consultant training in April in LA and September in San Francisco. I must say that I took that class. That was the most amazing class I took. It's a 5-day class, and that's after taking the class. That's when I said, you know, we have to do something about it. We need to talk about it, and that's really amazing. Last thing, in wrong date. Sorry, I did not update my the changes. The presentation is going to be in October, but it's going to be in Portland, in Pittsburgh. Sorry, if you did not go to Oakland, now next year you have to go to Pittsburgh. A lot of amazing passive house buildings, a lot of multi-family buildings. It will be a great conference, and hopefully we see many of you there. Next. I think we're done, and if you have any questions, here are my info, and if you want to ask any additional questions or whatsoever.
Well, that was excellent, Xavier. Sorry for that. We were laughing ourselves silly over there for being overheard.
Making my French accent again.
No. This is just Amanda Stowick was growling. I was asking her if she was hungry, and then it went from there. Hopefully you didn't hear any of that. My apologies. But boy, that was a good laugh. One of the questions just came in from Debbie. She's saying, you mentioned double insulation in the walls. How thick are the walls?
The walls, they're about 8 inches thick because of the 2x4 and the extra insulation. Yeah, that's the thickness of the two layers of insulation and the siding and the drywall. And
does that mean you have a two 2x4 walls? Does that?
Yes, we have 2x4 walls because that was the existing part of it, and so we could not change that. Maybe a 2x6 framing would have been good.
I see. So then, question from Bronwyn, or it says, let Tom know the most passive house projects in California are driven more by the primary energy cap than meeting the heating or cooling load targets. My latest Santa Rosa house can easily comply with current Bakersfield climate. Okay, so Tom was expressing concern about whether or not your house is resilient in the face of future climate change, if you considered changes in humidity and changes in heat extremes. He's asked that in a previous presentation, and Tom, I apologize for not getting to that question before. So Xavier, how resilient do you think your house is to the climate other than the current LA climate?
Okay. First of all, yeah, it's something I was concerned about because actually UCLA published a great study about the energy consumption and the climate, and apparently, unfortunately, it won't be just be apparently, but days over 95 degrees in LA are going to double or triple depending on the location in the next 20 years. So
yeah, it's getting hot down there.
Yeah, and the first approach was actually to try to do it without cooling. So the first option was to put an air conditioning unit because and we are even a 1-ton unit, it's oversized, and so we we should be fine, and we are far away from the passive house limits, and it should not be any problem. We can speak about it in 20 years.
If you stick around from the last presentation, which is mine, and on purpose, I gave myself the end of the presentation time. So you'll see that there are packaged terminal heat pumps, the through wall types. that you could consider, because they're 4,000 BTUs or 5,000 BTUs, not 12,000, you know, a whole ton. Have you ever considered using that product type just because they're small BTUs?
So I did not hear the first part. Sorry, you did cut.
Packaged, are you familiar? You must be familiar with a package terminal heat pump, like what you see in hotels as the heater and the air conditioner when you walk in. A through wall heat pump where you have a hole in the wall and then it's just a unitary block.
Okay, the HVAC selection was quite a journey. Since we have it's a two-story house and we have 3 bedrooms, and we're not using an HRV unit. We have continuous ventilation, but without an HRV unit. I wanted to make sure that we had air vents in all the living spaces. So what we're using here is a 1-ton air handling unit with high available static pressure, which actually was released. The first one was released for the house. It's a Mitsubishi unit. And so my concern with those units would be first the connection to the wall, then the air distribution and the noise level. So passive house requires some noise level for the HVAC equipment. And I don't think those type of units will meet my criteria or the passive house criteria in terms of noise level.
On the noise, there's one package terminal heat pump made by Arama, A-R-A-M-A, not Amana, which is a big manufacturer. But Arama is the only inverter-driven package terminal heat pump available in the United States, and it's imported from Japan, $1,300. But at least it's quiet, 45 sones, and it has an inverter so that it's really efficient. It can go to low temperatures, but they have a resistance element that turns on at 35 because they don't have a condensate drip, and therefore, if it was 4 stories up, you could have icicles fall off of it and kill somebody. So they turn on resistance energy instead of having a condensate pan and a line. My point is that there might be a product in the world that would make sense, and I'll show it later today.
Okay, but it's you can try whatever you want in terms of HVAC if it meets the capacity and the air distribution works. It's I'm sure it's if it's a good product, it can work. I saw sorry, Sean, I saw one question about the monitoring. We're going to post regularly data about the house because the goal is to show that it works. So about the people who are having doubts. I know it took 3 air conditioning contractors to find someone who would accept to install a 1-ton unit for a 2,000 square foot house. So yes, we're going to share all the information about the house and the performance.
Well then, thank you, Xavier. Yay! What a hero, a retrofit in Los Angeles. And it is beautiful, by the way. I was quietly applauding over here for your taste and style.
Thank you.
So it's okay, I'm going to mute you and I'm going to bring Antony on. Okay. So Antony is unmuted. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Right.
Hello.
He's unmuted. Hi, Antony. Can you speak a little bit louder? Let's see. Let me just mute it. Unmute it. Hey, Antony.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but it's still a little bit quiet.
Hold on just a second.
Can we try again?
Sure.
Get closer and louder.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
All right. Your quick intro. Antony, everybody, is a brilliant person. He was an intern of mine in like 2006 or 7, 8. I don't remember. You were my first intern back when we were at Danco. And the whole way along, he's been one of the most attentive and rigorous researchers on any question that we've ever examined together. And he's been off getting his master's and doctorate degree for a while. And you'll see that this presentation is going to really open your eyes to a lot of things you're not aware of about how bodies experience light. So thank you, Antony, so much for your time and for sharing your research with us. And with that, I will mute myself and let you take off, and just tell me to, forward or whatever to change slides.
Okay. So hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to kind of present some of my research. Before I begin, I just wanted to start off by saying I'm going to do my best not to confuse everyone on this up and coming IEQ topic area. So I guess just to kind of give you a little background on this, I guess the backstory is when I chose this topic years ago as a master's student, I started off just wanting to know what lighting for circadian health was. At the time, I honestly thought our understanding of lighting for circadian health was well established within basic research, and that it would just be a matter of synthesis. So in other words, if I just did the reading, I would understand how to apply it in research. After much study and now a PhD student, I can honestly say we don't really know what lighting for circadian health is. It would be more accurate to say our current understanding is based on darkness for circadian health. So I guess when you walk away from this, me presenting, you get exposed to more research in this area. So when the topic of lighting for circadian health does come up again, just know the conclusions are extrapolated from studies around darkness and not light. Next slide, please. So that being said, the following is a short presentation that I've prepared that provides an overview of some pertinent background, gaps within this field of research, and a few projects I'm putting together to address some of these gaps. Next slide. So there is strong evidence suggesting that circadian disruption due to light at night contributes to breast cancer, prostate cancer, diabetes, obesity, mood disorders, reproductive problems, and cognitive deficits. In addition, as people on average spend 93% of their time indoors, and that's, I would say more in the developed world, the implications for indoor lighting is strong. Due to the possibility that the health consequences are substantial and at pandemic levels, the international health science community has identified 5 research priorities. One of these priorities being how light and darkness can be optimized for circadian health. In my subsequent slides, I will further elaborate on the concepts of circadian health, in addition to light and darkness, the concepts. Keep in mind, light at night, is the absence of darkness. This type of exposure is what health scientists have focused on for the last 50 years. Next slide, please. So the current model, known as the synchronizing model, acknowledges the existence of a constellation of clocks in peripheral tissues. The significance of this, hold on, actually, let me back it up. So an early model of circadian health focused around the importance of light in training a single master clock, known as a suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN. On a side note, the SCN as master clock in our body was discovered at Berkeley. This time period is sometimes known as the strong rhythm era, and focused primarily on the effect measure of sleep and wake patterns. So basically, for the past 50 or 60 years, we've kind of just focused on how our activity patterns of sleep and wake were the main effect measure in any type of circadian rhythmic study. I think as of 2007, we have a more nuanced understanding of this health model of circadian rhythms. This current model, known as the synchronizing model, acknowledges the existence of a constellation of clocks in our peripheral tissues. So when I say peripheral tissues, like clocks in our liver, clocks in our heart, clocks in our lung, clocks in our stomach, so on and so forth. The significance of this is that circadian health depends on the phase alignment or coherence of these clocks in order for human health to resonate. Next slide. So one way of looking at this is, imagine one clock produces a single sine wave. Our early understanding of circadian rhythmic health focused on the patterns of this one sine wave. Our current understanding of circadian rhythmic health now focuses on multiple sine waves being able to synchronize and align in phase. The slide shows the phase desynchrony of a jet lag rodent on the left versus controls of a healthy rodent on the right. So it kind of can help you visualize the desynchrony versus synchrony of, I guess, when you experience when you experience transmeridian flight. Next slide. So I also put this analogy together as it might be easier for the building science community to digest. So imagine a control sequence for a large building. The system itself has a central clock, but the subsystems also have timepieces. Then imagine a constant disruption in any of the timepieces in which the schedules for the individual components of the system operate by, even if it's for a second or maybe 12 seconds, a couple minutes. The chaos of which would lower the health of the mechanical system in general, lower its efficiency, cause premature wear, and in an extreme case, cause catastrophic failure. Now imagine the same scenario, but for the human body. Current public health research associates this chronic circadian disruption with a very long list of diseases such as cancer, congenital heart disease, diabetes, obesity, impotence, dementia. Basically, it suggests it underlies almost every single health outcome. So it's about how much premature wear is being created by circadian disruption on human health over time. One of the challenges with this area of research around trying to, quote unquote, quantify human health outcomes is that the outcomes themselves are kind of, not say bear fruit, but the outputs happen over decades of, I guess, chronic circadian disruption. Next slide. So a little bit more about some background concepts. Desynchronizing and synchronizing light, along with light and dark spectra, are not formalized concepts within the field of chronobiology, but rather terms I developed to explain this particular research area on lighting. They are associated and I operationalize them as follows. The concept of desynchronizing and synchronizing light is based on what I just talked about, our current understanding of circadian health models. Again, that rhythmic health is less about entraining one clock and more about the alignment of many clocks in our bodies. As modern humans evolved with access to only daylight, it stands to reason that the delineation between synchronizing and desynchronizing light be bounded by sunrise and sunset, which is tied to latitude. The following heat map visualizes this concept over the 8,760 years of the year. The term light and dark spectra is a concept important in operationalizing lighting or absence of lighting for circadian health. So in theory, regressing back to the state in which humans only had access or exposed to daylight would be a difficult value proposition to present to the developed world. So identifying the optimal wavelength bands for synchronizing light and for mitigating desynchronizing light is a sensible strategy. In addition, this strategy would support and not supplant the ongoing efforts on lighting energy efficiency. Once objectives are identified, reorienting existing processes to efficiently optimize light and dark spectra for circadian health can be applied. Next slide. So I felt it was important to contextualize this, a structural issue around researching synchronizing light. So just to kind of give you a backstory, long ago, the health science community adopted using standardized rodent models that were nocturnal for basic research. With the US government spending about $16 billion a year supporting animal research, 82% of funding goes towards supporting research using these standardized nocturnal rodent models. This distinction is important here as synchronizing light or lighting for circadian health is impossible to test under basic conditions using these models. In short, our theoretical understanding is almost non-existent around synchronizing light. Again, it would be more accurate for us to refer to the body of evidence as darkness for circadian health. Next slide. So in summary, in the background section, circadian health shifted from a strong rhythm to a synchronizing model. Second, evidence gathered so far has focused more on darkness for circadian health rather than the role of lighting for circadian health. And third, basic research so far has focused on desynchronizing light and not synchronizing light. Next slide. So realizing all this, number one, I was kind of bummed at first, only because I was like, I can't do applied research. I think I was fortunate enough to have the right supervision and support from some of my advisors at Berkeley that have a very deep background in behavioral neurobiology, which they just suggested, hey, if you have a little bit more time, maybe you should just learn how to do the basic research. So my dissertation, though I'm in building science, I've been dabbling in more doing fundamental research with appropriate rodent models. And this is the first one of them. So this project I'm putting together is under basic research. I realized without developing some theory in this area, the idea of doing applied research would be hit or miss. Using using a specialized piece of equipment called a spectral emulator, I'm working toward testing different kinds of spectral power distributions and its effect on circadian synchrony. The main hypothesis I'm looking to test focuses around the differential effects of light spectrum among peripheral clocks. So another way to put it is, I'm hypothesizing that different wavelengths of light can differentially affect different peripheral clocks in our body. So, for example, we don't actually know that, hey, bright red light actually can affect appetite in some ways. There's been some anecdotal kind of research done in that area, but it was never really intended to answer that specific question. So an experiment like this would actually help us understand how different kinds of, the recipe of a light source affects the different types or different clocks in our bodies.
Hey, Antony?
Yes.
When our conversation, the most fascinating part of it is that you were going to go find diurnal mice. Like you were going to get not rats that are nocturnal and have all of their biology set up around that. Are you going to be discussing that in more detail, or can I ask you to discuss it now? If not,
we'll circle back. I have a slide on it. I'm going to mention it. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I do have a slide on it. And
okay,
if I don't necessarily cover exactly what you think I'm going to cover, then we can. I can address it in the Q&A kind of portion of my presentation.
All right.
Okay. Next slide. Sean, next slide. Hello. Next slide.
Hey, apologies. We're technical problem. We'll be right back up in a sec.
Okay. So the second project I'm putting together is also under basic research. And with my understanding of, I want to say like countless months of reading primary literature, which is, at first it was kind of super tedious, but it's actually pretty exciting. I love it. I know it sounds geeky, but it's to me, it's interesting what people have done. So my second objective is around this concept around effect modification. I believe light is a positive and negative effect modifier that is dependent on time and spectrum. So keep in mind that this is abductively reasoned. There is no evidence from direct experimentation that has tested this hypothesis. However, there are plenty of hints within the body of literature to suggest it. So in review, effect modification occurs when the magnitude of an effect from a primary exposure differs depending on the level of a third variable, right? So in this case, let's say you were studying exposure to light at night on the rates of breast cancer. In the effect modification scenario, an increased exposure to synchronizing light or light exposure during the daytime would positively modify the effect or simply lower the rates of breast cancer. So there would be many implications across many sectors if this hypothesis is supported. A simple takeaway within architecture would be more exposure to synchronizing light during the day, whether it be in the form of spending more time outside when the sun is up or just being more exposed to indoor lighting can mitigate the effects of light at nighttime. Next slide. So far my lit review points to photostasis as the specific retinal mechanism that would facilitate effect modification. In short, photostasis is the adaptive process whereby the photoreceptors in our retina normalize to an absolute photon capture. Researchers think it's an evolutionary adaptation that allows us to adapt to seasonal changes in light intensity and duration. So analogously, if you were to think of photoreceptors like photovoltaic panels, imagine PV panels that were engineered to normalize to an absolute photon capture. So effectively, it would have the same output across seasons. So whether it was December 24th or July 4th, your PV panels would generate the same amount of energy that day, independent of latitude, right? The idea of photostasis is the fact that the sensitivities of the photon capturing cells in our eyes change sensitivities based on previous light history. So with regard to humans, this process for normalizing happens over 10 to 12 days through daily shedding events of these outer segments of our photoreceptors. Hold on just a second. So under photostasis, encoding of changes in sensitivity would occur during this daily shedding event. Okay, next slide. To facilitate answering these two fundamental research projects I'm working on, I'm using this Nile grass rat as the animal model. The diurnal rodent has advantages over more commonly available nocturnal ones. The obvious one being studies around synchronizing light can be readily tested as they are day active. In addition, this model has a more representative photoreceptor mosaic closer to humans than nocturnal rodents do. This diurnal rodent can actually experience color where nocturnal rodents cannot, because they don't necessarily have the same type of photoreceptor combinations. Yeah. Next slide. So the last project I'm working on is more in the area of applied research. It's developing a pervasive wireless spectral environmental sensor. The actual platform itself is actually called the Hamilton, and it already exists and was developed by a computer science electrical engineering PhD student at Cal by the name of Michael Anderson under a DOE project. My focus is to add this nano radio spectrometer feature to the platform. I believe as more theory around synchronizing light becomes available, translating it for use in public policy will require field data. More specifically, we'll need to understand the spectral exposure patterns from the point of view of a representative population. So similar to if we wanted to study the impacts of, let's say, an energy efficient technology on our building stock, we use, a representative data set. In the US, we often use the US Energy Information Agency's, consumption and efficiency survey data to study impacts across different building types. In the case of light and dark spectra for circadian health, there is no database and there is no equipment. this novel device would help address that need and set us on the road to optimizing light and dark spectra for circadian health. Next slide. Any questions? Thanks for listening.
Oh, Antony, that was even better than I hoped. That was awesome. So, cute picture of your rats. Let's see here. It doesn't look like anyone typed in any questions yet. People are welcome to do that. We're going to have about 4 minutes into our next presentation. Well, so, here we go. Next one's going to be, just so you know, this tie, the next presentation is on environmental chemistry. And this is a similarly, I mean, it's actually a lot better study than what you've been working on. So how about this, Antony? I had a question of, like, you have bumped into a lot of misunderstandings, a ton, because there's so little basic research, and what's out there has been used, you know, studying the wrong animal with the wrong photoreceptors in their eyeballs and the wrong rhythms and all the rest of it. It's just been all upside down. So what are some conventional wisdoms that you've bumped into that you could please discredit for the crew of people on the phone, like things that we thought we knew that we don't know that?
I mean, one of the things I like to point, especially from for the community that works in the design, engineering, and construction of buildings is, you know, like, I guess post 1950s, we shifted away from this model of shaping our buildings like giant daylight fixtures, because all of a sudden we had these fancy things called fluorescent lighting. All of a sudden, you know, the form giving of an actual building was independent of what daylight was doing in a specific latitude. I think, you know, there's, you know, no one's done a study, but I'm sure, like, with regards to if you want to do a historical kind of research project associating, you know, health consequences of the built environment, I would say, you know, that'd be a good question to answer. So long story short, you know, you look at maybe, you know, for anyone that's walked into, let's say, transitional architecture, or let's say, you know, turn of the century Victorian, you walk in and you realize, wow, these 12-foot ceilings are nice. You know, those are kind of like almost, I don't say mandatory, but it was a function of how much practical daylight that could enter a space because they couldn't rely on electrical lighting. So that full spectrum light, I think for the most part, you know, would be a good start and would be a good kind of thing to consider for folks that are really thinking about some progressive ways of addressing this at the lowest level, which is basically just using nature. Another way to put it is, I wouldn't necessarily put too much faith in these very, very fancy light changing LEDs. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing it out, because that's what I see out there as products, is people thinking that that there's science out there supporting blue lights or red lights or turning this light on at this time or that time. And what I'm understanding from you, which is quite eye-opening, is that the science doesn't support those assertions. But is that too strong a statement?
It does not. There's actually nothing that supports those statements. There's kind of like research. It's basically, they have some correlation research that kind of suggests it, but in some ways there's also, you know, the same number of studies that actually try to disprove it, or they provide evidence that it doesn't work. And it's probably because a lot of this research, there's a lot of confounding based on outside variables that people have yet to kind of control for. Yeah, that's my take on it. I mean, I think electrical lighting has its place. It's just, I don't necessarily think it's a cure-all for every scenario and situation, especially for new construction.
And well, then thank you, Antony. This is, I think, the moment we're supposed to transition over to our next presenter, Chelsea. So hope everyone heard that, you know, the lights out there, we don't have studies supporting that one light bulb does something different from another. I mean, would you even say that the effort around computer screens, you know, that there's a big movement to try to get the screens to give you certain lighting during the day or night? Is that bunk?
I would say for that research is more, it supports that it helps mitigate light at nighttime. And again, even the quote unquote, I guess you could say, the exposure levels to light vary quite a bit, and it suggests the fact that previous light history during the daytime has something to do with it being kind of having a very large range in outcomes. And this is perhaps where my research project on photostasis comes in, because it would help explain a lot of this, how do I say this, confounding.
And I note that, you were saying there's many different clocks. I'm trained as a biologist, and I could say that, yeah, this is a very complex organism that we are inhabiting. It's incredible, multicellular organism that we are. And each cell essentially has its own clock, and that's a fact.
Yes.
So to get them all rhythmically working together, I can only imagine like inserting a little bit of red light here or a little bit of blue light there might make a change, but that's not something that we can understand very well yet. At least, well, anyway, I should summarize saying I'm really looking forward to the conclusion of your research. I think it's amazing that you've gotten your own new rat and you've invented your own little meter and you're having to go out there and do both basic research and applied research and wrap it all together in your doctoral program.
Just to let you know, there's a couple questions that came in, but I'm more than willing to kind of answer this by chat while the next presenter is
I think that these things they're related. One is advanced fenestration. How does that affect daylight quality? And the other one is, do LED lights mimic natural skylighting? Do you have any thoughts on those two?
We're doing a study right now, and it's just kind of doing some simulation of a database within LBNL's, was it glazing layer database? And what we're looking at is, there's we use the performance metric of visual light transmittance. I think for the most part, a lot of people are familiar with, hey, my VT for this glass is, 0.6 or 0.3.
Show Chelsea's presentation.
Yeah.
I want to say for the most part, there's a plus or minus 15% with regards to melanopic light transmittance through the same piece of glass. So I would have to say that, that's one of the things that we should, probably consider. And we're probably going to try to encourage the powers to be to actually introduce a new performance rating category. Not sure exactly how many people I need to talk to, but hopefully this paper that we're putting together can at least be a good kind of point of reference or departure point on taking this more seriously. With regards to, is there any research regarding a certain LED lighting frequency or spectrum that mimics natural light to augment? Yes, there is. And it's very specific use cases. I think for the most part, the popular go-to, what they call population people like to do studies in to get really good results are in old folks, like in older populations of folks that are at high risk. So basically maybe an older community that had like a dementia population, because they tend to be at high risk because their circadian rhythmic patterns are already pretty disrupted. So a lot of research suggests that, these very specific blue lights that peak in 480 nanometers actually has some very positive therapeutic effects. Like they sleep better, their sleep quality goes up, they're less irritable, so on and so forth. So there is research out there that supports very specific case uses. But when they try to repeat it in quote unquote younger healthy populations, they don't necessarily see the same results. Yeah.
And that vulnerable populations would probably be the canary in the coal mine. Literally.
Yes.
Well, thank you for that. You're awesome. Yay! Antony, brilliant. Super interesting. Well illustrated. I'm going to mute you now, and I'm going to bring on Chelsea. Let's see. And Chelsea's there. You're unmuted. Hi, Chelsea. Can you say hello to us?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hello?
Make sure you're close to the the phone or the computer or whatever, and just tell us. Next slide. So your introduction briefly. For years, people have been trying to figure out why little kids get sick. Why do they get cancer when they're young? My brother had cancer when he was 21, and that was something that he was actually born with, apparently. So with this rash of really terrible illnesses, I've been working with my interns, and Chelsea is a engineering student with an environmental chemistry background and passion, some of the classwork that she takes. So the goal here is to talk, baby safe out there exists, like, building codes say you can't have a banister that's more than 3.5 inches wide because a baby can get their head stuck in between the railings. Like things that protect babies from known hazards. Shatter glass next to a door, so people break glass windows all the time. I'm hoping that we can move forward on something that addresses environmental chemistry as something specifically for babies, vulnerable populations. In this presentation, it would be relevant for senior citizens in different ways, but babies are developing their bodies and they breathe 4 times as fast as we do, and they do so much more work growing, and the damages they are inflicted upon them in the womb and during their early years are permanent and irrevocable. So thank you, Chelsea. I'm trying to make it, people see the relevance of this. I'm going to mute myself.
Right, yeah.
And proceed.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Chelsea, and I'm very excited to be presenting my research and analysis. My research was primarily based on an indoor toxicology report put together by a previous intern, where I analyzed the volume of mass ingested by infants from toxic chemicals in everyday household products. And then I compared these values with adults in an illustrative table of pills with ingestion from accumulation. So in the first slide, we see an illustration of built-in exposures to flame retardants found in everyday objects. So from furniture and textiles to building materials, including foam insulation, and then carpet, toys, and electronics. Something to keep in mind is that while fire safety is a serious concern, scientific research has shown that flame retardant chemicals do not significantly improve fire protection. So there's another reason why we do not need flame retardants in our insulation and building materials. The next slide shows a few more sources of exposure from all around the house. So we're mainly looking at bedrooms in this study, but I thought this illustration was kind of a good way to see what else is around children and specifically babies that may cause some health problems. The next slide shows chemicals of concern with published data. So flame retardants being number one, right? This includes floor polishes, PVC plastics, paints, wallpapers, textiles, plasticizers, lubricants, so many things. And then VOCs, of course, carpet, paints, adhesives that contain all these horrible things like benzene, formaldehyde, xylene, and the list goes on and on and on. And same thing with semi-VOCs. Pesticides, of course, you see in insect repellents, products to kill mold and mildew, rat poison, and then in plasticizers, it can go as little as the baby toys, right? These things that babies are putting into their mouth every day. So next slide. This slide is a timeline of the California Technical Bulletin 117, which was implemented in 1975 and led to the use of harmful flame retardants in furniture and baby products, including the most commonly used polyurethane foam in building insulation. And the purpose of this was so that it could withstand a 12-second exposure to an open flame. And thankfully, finally, in 2012, Governor Edmund G. Brown directed the Bureau of Electronic and Appliance Repair, Home Furnishings, and Thermal Insulation to revise the bulletin and to modernize the standards to reduce Californians' exposure to harmful flame retardant chemicals. So in 2013, the Bureau announced a replacement standard. This new standard was to take effect on January 1st, 2014. And this made it mandatory for all new furniture manufactured after January 1st, 2015 to meet the smolder-resistant requirements of resilient filling material. So pretty much what this does is it discontinued the use of open flame tests and retains a modified version of the smolder test. And so if some of you don't know what the smolder test is, the smolder test assesses the resistance of the material of the upholstered furniture that it's made out of and looks at the combustion after exposure to fire. And so this didn't necessarily restrict the use of flame retardants, but it did make it so that they would, manufacturers would kind of, revise and take a look at other alternatives to use to reduce health impacts. Moving on to the next slide. This is a list of top 10 things to avoid for exposure. And these results were based on the highest safety concerns to reduce health effects based off volume of mass ingested in cubic centimeters from the indoor toxicology report. So number one, we have furniture containing flame retardants, of course. Second one pertains to building insulation. And then we look at VOCs, gas cookers, which off-gas a bunch of nasty stuff. And then foam used in building insulation, wood-based products which contain plasticizers, such as sealants, everyday household cleaners containing acetone, pesticides used to kill insects, baby cleaning products, and plastic roofing material. This one isn't indoors, but it does have an impact. I mean, if you look at plastic roofing material, you could see some toxic chemicals in runoff that goes directly to our stormwater. And so I thought that was pretty interesting to put in there, even though it doesn't pertain to indoors. The next slide. This graph depicts the recommended long-term exposure for inhalation from the EPA exposure factors proposed in 2011. So we can see here that the mean is about half or a third lower than the 95th percentile exposure rates, which is good, but again, could be better by reducing some of the chemicals that we are exposed to. And of course, we see an increase in exposure as age increases. So you could only imagine what the accumulation looks like when we reach 65 years old. The next slide.
Before we go there, sorry, Chelsea, but I do appreciate this slide. What you're showing us is the mean is blue, and the 95th percentile, meaning that there's 5% of the kids are above the green line?
Exactly.
Okay. So you're bounding sort of like the average as well as the extreme. And what you're showing us here as well is like a baby when it's born, for instance, the average has got 3.6 and it goes up to 8.9. So it nearly triples in the course of, 2 or 3 years in their life?
Yeah.
So I want to point out that these are years in which you have a tremendous amount of cognitive development that is taking place. You're outside of the womb and you're learning how to see, read, interpret, listen, make executive decisions. Like there's just constant amounts of brain development. I have 3 little kids and it's just overwhelming to watch them slowly, daily grow from not knowing to knowing tons of things. So it's really worrisome to see so much pollution happening to them in the middle of that important biological process. Okay, thanks for helping me understand. I'll mute myself.
Thank you, Sean. So now we go into the health effects to touch on what Sean was saying and why it's important that we take this matter seriously. Flame retardants, health effects. Okay, cancer, we see obesity, reproductive and developmental toxicity. This is from the California Environmental Contaminant Biomonitoring Program. These are all based on like high levels of volume ingested. So if flame retardants is number one, I mean, we could just imagine the things that we could do to cut down pretty easily. Like Technical Bulletin 117 is one thing, the revised version. Looking at alternatives for insulation and such things, which I will talk about in recommendations. So a few volatile organic compound health effects from polychlorinated biphenyls include hepatotoxic effects such as liver function, thyroid disease, and changes in hormone levels. And then exposure to acetone includes irritation of nose, throat, lungs, and eyes, which could cause also asthma. And then in semi-VOCs, we look at biocides and preservatives, which can cause cancer, breathing disorders, again, allergic reactions, pesticides, damage to nervous system, reproductive system, skin and brain development, which is crucial in a baby's development. Again, plasticizers, including birth defects in the womb, so things that the mother is exposed to, lung disorders, and reproductive problems. Something interesting that I was reading also is that in Canada alone, a study was conducted that said that 92% of pregnant women had traces of toxic chemicals from VOCs in their breast milk. So when their babies were being exposed to all these crazy things from just breast milk itself. So the next slide goes into the analysis part. These tablets seen here are used for representation of pesticides, flame retardants, and plasticizers. This is based off the indoor toxicology report again. And the children's Claritin was used as a comparison for pesticides. Benadryl was used as a comparison for flame retardants, and acetaminophen was used as a comparison for plasticizers. These were just used as the comparison for rates of exposure from inhalation and ingestion for the toxic chemicals, and then the accumulation and what that would look like in a pill form, pretty much. So the first one, pillbox number 1, is looking at age 1. So we see that a pesticide tablet would be about 0.14, and the same thing with the flame retardant, and plasticizers is about 0.2, with a total accumulation of half a pill. So relating this back to that that graph of recommended long-term exposure, it makes sense. I mean, at one, you're going to have an increase as age increases of the accumulated toxic chemicals in our bodies, because when we move on to pillbox 2, 3, 4, and 5, we see an increase in all of these. So pillbox 2 shows a total accumulation of 3 pills. Pillbox 3 shows an accumulation of 6 pills at age 15. Pillbox 2 was at age 5. And then pillbox 4 is at age 30 with an accumulation of 10 pills. And then the good one, pillbox 5, shows that age 65, we have about 20 of these total accumulated pills in our bodies. And so moving on to our recommendations, with this analysis, I'd kind of like to make a point of improvements for design standards. These include, of course, source controls, removing carpet, replacing foam wall insulation with alternatives, such as like cotton denim batting and sheep's wool insulation, or just a better HVAC system. To replace old furniture manufactured before 2015, such that health problems associated with flame retardants are reduced. Environmentally friendly household cleaning products. Choosing electric over gas stoves, of course, because gas is just off-gas and so many horrible things, and electric is better anyways. Buying baby-safe non-plastic toys, so babies aren't chewing on toxic chemicals literally every day. So these include things like pacifiers, and to always maintain a clean living environment. Thank you. That's all I have for now. And if there's any questions, I am open.
Well, thank you, Chelsea. That was excellent. And here we go. Yay! For the baby. Yay.
I know, right, babies? Hey.
So over there in the comments, you note that yesterday we were discussing, you were mentioning gas cookers, and Tom Phillips presented on appropriate hood design. And we were discussing some of the formaldehyde that you can see in figure 2 of the link that he's provided. Tom also says, I may have missed it. Did you include walk-off mats and shoes, HEPA vacs? I don't think that Chelsea said those. So do you want to speak to any of the other measures that you encountered to reduce indoor air pollution for kids, or just indoor pollution? Oh, I see. That was for you, Chelsea. Oh, but you're muted. Ah, okay, you're unmuted now. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, you're
Chelsea,
fine.
what other good piece of advice? There's walk-off mats, shoes off households, HEPA-vacs. Any other thoughts you want?
Well, I would say for like I mean, taking out carpet in general, right?
Yeah, I can share that some of the people who went to the Zero Net Energy retreat, I think a year ago, or like the first one, there was a low-income tenant whose son was going to the hospital multiple times a year, 10 times a year, 15 times a year. He had a respirator he had to breathe on every night, a nebulizer, and removing the carpet, which was 13 years old in the apartment, and replacing it with linoleum, 100% solved this 5-year-old's chronic visits to the hospital. Nebulizer is put away up in the closet, no more use of it at all. The kid's just fine. And that just happened a year ago. It's really just tragic to see it. So yeah, the carpet pads are so filthy. And then my understanding is that it's a lot of semi-volatile organic compounds that come off of little tiny fragments of carpet pad and carpets that are, carcinogenic, mutagenic, estrogenic, fake nasty chemicals in your body. And of course, your baby is right next to the carpet, face first.
Exactly. They're always on the ground, and all they can do is just put everything into their mouth. So.
Yeah, I was amazed. I had twins, and one of my twins started eating the poop off the floor right behind the other twin. Kind of a famous story that we tell about them. To exemplify, they will eat anything and everything. We stopped her, by the way. So Shane, he said, have you looked at the blowing agents of different foams to see whether there are some foams that are less harmful than others? Shane, to speak to this briefly, flame retardants decrease the functionality of foam, and the foam industry has never wanted to add flame retardants. It was the cigarette industry in the 70s that insisted that people should be able to just have lit cigarettes in bed, that then triggered having flame retardants and everything else. But that was the cigarette industry. And now only 5% of teenagers are smoking cigarettes. So we can take the flame retardants out of the foams now, because at least in couches and bedding and things like that. I'm not so sure about insulation in the walls, but I think you should and could, because there's other ways to prevent fires besides adding terrible chemicals to your environment. Okay, so I guess this is a good moment for us to transition. Chelsea, any last comments you wanted to make? Oh no, you gotta unmute her. Oh, she muted herself. Oh, okay. Well, I think that we're complete then.
Hello? Oh,
there you are.
sorry, I don't know what was going on.
It's okay. I was just saying, I think if it's okay, we're going to transition. Thank you very much for your preparation, your excellent presentation of data. Yay! Okay, give us a moment here, and we're going to start up the next presentation.
It's yours.
Oh, it's me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm on deck. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. We're at the end of the day. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cool.
I don't know where you are. Where your presentation is. You'll have to find it.
Okay. Let's try to skip by this. Can I get to my screen? And and then okay, here's my slideshow. Can you arrange for it to be?
Is this the one from yesterday?
Yeah, this is my presentation.
Okay.
Oh no, wait a minute.
It's
No,
from yesterday.
This is from yesterday. That's not the presentation. Oh. Round pause. Okay. Here we go. There's the right one. All right. I'm so excited. Okay, can I be there? All right, everybody. So, picking up the dog leg of the day, I would like to show you guys some things that you probably have not seen much of. And that was the goal that I had, was to try to sort of play cleanup, mop up at the end of the sessions. So I'm going to talk about things, just induction cooking and less known heat pump technologies. Yesterday I introduced myself, so just briefly again, I've been working in this field since about 1995, and my partner Michael since about 1996, and we're both really into how to decarbonize buildings and have lots of experience. Okay, so I loved learning this. Julia Child cooked on electric resistance, and all of her TV shows. The laughing French CIA agent was also an electric resistance fan. And so she would have multiple burners cooking at different temperatures and just move pans around. Today, the most popular cooking show on Netflix is The Great British Bake Off. And it is awesome and hysterical. And they make really fancy foods all on induction. That's the updated version of Julia Child. The induction, which is electric magnets. So down here you can see Wolfgang Puck. He sells his own personal induction stove. He wants people to buy his. He also has a really fun pressure cooker. Like, it's a pressure, it looks like a microwave, but it does pressure cooking. It's quite a piece of work. So starting off, I encourage everyone to spend 40 or 50 bucks or something like that and get yourself at least one burner so you can play with it. I've got the Gourmet in my house here in the middle, and I got a couple, I have one to give away still behind me. To understand distinctions, I'm just gonna go down for a moment. So you see the 5 products going across to the right. In amps and wattage, this makes a difference as to what you can plug things into. Every circuit in your house has at least 15 amps delivered to it. So these are all products that you can plug into the wall. And they're all 120 volts, and they're small. Note though that it has difference in pricing. Some of these things are fancy, some of them are cheap. So $1,800 for a single burner, right? I hope you like that. But I like going for $50 versions myself. The Avantco over there on the right is a very popular one online, by the way. And I also want to point out that I like knobs. So the Gourmet in the middle is similar to others that I've purchased as gifts for people to get something that feels kind of like a gas stove. Now, a little fancier next step up is the drop-in. These are ones that sit on the countertop. So they're like a blender, no big deal. These ones are not like a blender. You cut a hole in your counter and you'd slip it in. And people do this in fancy houses. You'll see all sorts of exotic looking countertops, like perfect stark white. And then 5, sort of sci-fi looking black dots on this countertop. And that's where you're supposed to cook. And they're arranged in some artsy way because you can. So these favor that kind of thinking where you put a burner wherever you want it. And I'm going to show you what you do in if you're trying to make a new kitchen for yourself. This is the smart way to go. You don't have to run gas, which is expensive, dangerous, requires gigantic hoods, has a significant amount of delays in getting permitted. If you're trying to open a restaurant, which is a business that operates usually on a 5% margin, and it's almost like a 3 in 4 chance of failing within a couple of years. It's a hard business to get into. So restaurants have been moving towards getting single induction burners that are commercial grade, so they can just work all day, all night. They have powerful components within them. And more importantly, I think, they have small individual loops of magnets. If I've been thinking ahead, I would have shown you what it looks like inside. But it looks like a copper record, like one disc of copper lines wound around and around to make a magnetic field. But these ones that you're looking at, they have multiple little round circles of magnetic induction. And they do this to better spread heat over the pan, to have more controllability. They move to more small things as opposed to one big one. So fancier stoves, they're more durable and have perhaps a little bit better heat spread. So this is the drop-in version. Look on the upper left-hand corner. I was having fun last night on Etsy. You can find photos of this. These are induction woks. Check it out. A wok and this is really real. This is a product type that's all over the place. Drop-in woks for restaurants in other countries, and in restaurants in cities in the United States. Maybe you'd find one, but they're actually pretty popular elsewhere in the world. So that's what that would look like. You have like kind of a show kitchen and you drop them in, as opposed to the previous one where you got people in the back and it's not for show, it's just to get the work done. So the next one here is 2 burners. The one I have in my house is the Eurodib, the S2F1. And once again, on the left-hand side, you can see a really nice one for $1,500 or $1,100. And then there's the more reasonable $150, $200, $400 version. I want to draw attention to Summit on the right-hand corner. Summit is out of, I think it's the Bronx or Queens, I forget. But it's an import business, and Summit is a brand you should all be familiar with if you're into tiny homes or apartments. They import from Mexico, from Brazil, from Portugal. They import from countries that are not as wealthy, but fully developed as the United States. So people will have less burners, less resources, they'll have less space. New York City, obviously, space is an incredible premium, and it'd be just as appropriate for Palo Alto or Mountain View or San Francisco to go to Summit and try to find this small induction hob, they're called, or just the 2 burners, the small washing machines, the small dryers, the small stuff, small refrigerators that are appropriate for, for use, really nice, high quality. People love Summit. Just want you to know they exist. So next, just showing you the range. These things exist if you haven't seen them before. Note, for instance, the price. We're starting to get into $2,000 and $3,000 for these 2 burners. So you get a sense of like a residential grade induction burner might be $50 to $100 and $200 to $400 for 2 of them. And it's just on the commercial side, it's like $1,000. So there's an order of magnitude more cost, metal, durability and such in commercial products. Just to note why the price differential is there. It's not because they're being gougy. It's a different product they're selling. So this is the drop-in version, just so you know. You can get things like Wolf starting to appear and Volrath. These are really fancy high-end products. Now these are residential and commercial. These are the drop-in countertops, kind of stuff that I've seen in well-off people's homes. They're like they'll have 2 ovens on the wall and they'll have 4 burners and a drop-in countertop. Looks real slick. There are ones that actually you can buy that sit on top of your countertop, and there's ones that fit in. Both there for you. Then this might be a little bit more, maybe, I don't know what you guys all have in your homes. This is what I would have in my home, hypothetically. I actually, like I mentioned, I have a 2-burner induction and then a small plug-in oven for my fuel switching. But this is what my mom next door, she's got the KitchenAid. The $3,000 product. She got it for $2,200. And she got the double oven version, to point out. She actually has a nicer version than what you're seeing here. And I want to note that something that is not evident here is these products make different amounts of noise. There is an electronic whine or hum to some products that is not there in others. Some of them use fans that are muffled and are really quiet, but are getting the job of the fan done. And other ones are kind of noisy fans. I'm just putting out there that I wish that there was something like an Energy Star standard that either set a minimum for noisiness or standardized the explanation of how much noise you're going to experience. And it's not like it's a lot and annoying. It's just I've noticed that it's a quality difference between one product and another that's invisible to people. And I just would prefer people have no complaints. They get the one they wanted. And I myself have been buying, like, I think I've gotten 5 different induction ranges to play with now, to just note that there's minor differences between them. So freestanding induction ranges with slide in. Oh, I see. We're starting to get into some bigger products here. The Bertazzoni Professional Series. If you want to spend a lot of money, you can definitely spend $11,000 on a 6-burner range. With a double oven or a triple warming oven, and like anything else, you can spend a bunch of money. A brief anecdote: my brother is a famous international artist. I'm very proud of him. He was living in the home of France's richest billionaire. This guy owns Gucci and owns a bunch of other big names. And my brother and his wife are kind of his pet artists. He has this gigantic collection of modern art. So they were living in his show house in the north of France for a year, making art in his fancy studio in the backyard. And they have an induction range, like as a 6-burner, because they're supposed to entertain parties of 100 or something at this fancy house. And that's what you see in France. That's what you see in people's high-end, expensive, I'm showing off kind of homes. You see induction. That's what people want to use. It's everyone understands that it cooks faster, so like twice as fast as gas to get the job done, and it's really controllable, quickly controllable in a way that electric resistance sometimes has a lot of heat lag to the metal coils, and magnetic induction, if you turn down the heat, so to speak, it immediately reduces the energy delivered to the pan. It's instantaneous, speed of light. So it's a much faster in its responsiveness. Okay, I've shown you that all the electric induction versions exist. You should know that commercial electric resistance is still a real thing out there in the world. And there is a modest difference in efficiency between induction and resistance. And it has everything to do with how well the pot sits on the stove. So if it like fits and is flat on the bottom and touches all the metal, there's no difference in efficiency between induction and resistance. But resistance usually has a pot on top of it that's kind of wobbly and doesn't come in complete contact, and it loses efficiency that way. So these are electric resistance kick butt stoves. They'll get the job done too. Similarly, just I'm hoping that people are thinking about converting commercial kitchens, perhaps preferentially. Like if we look around at how we're going to decarbonize cooking, where do you start? I think that you start at kitchens. I think you start with the leadership of professional restaurants and help them switch so that they can show people at home, this is how you do it. That's how people get taught how to cook, really, is they watch other people. I took cooking classes in high school and middle school, and other people watch TV shows, and like you watch other people. So professional chefs would be probably a good place to start. One other thing is that the cooking energy cycle of restaurants perfectly matches the sun, whereas cooking at home is usually done as the sun is setting or even afterwards. So if you were looking at like where would you have beneficial decarbonizing electrification happening, it would be during the middle of the day when we have solar coming into the grid, and sometimes it's not even getting used. So this would be the chance, is to electrify restaurants, I would argue, and schools, which have a tremendous amount of money for decarbonization. So look at this stuff here. This is what you should be thinking about for restaurants and schools, for these big commercial kitchens. Continuing on, they get bigger and bigger and more expensive. So what Tom Phillips says, I will try a single burner, but under my range hood, just so. Nehemiah wants to know what brand model Julia Childs used. Well, she started in the 50s with electric resistance, and I just don't know. Wolfgang, he has his own brands. Just say that's a fun thing. He's Wolfgang is really selling stuff. You know, he sells foods and he has restaurants and airports and everything else. He sells all of his own cooking equipment. So it's a Wolfgang brand. Okay, let's move into water heaters. I consult with apartment complex developers who always have a community building, and we've had a lot of discussions around how do you deal with just tiny hot water demands where it doesn't make sense to plumb water from the other side of the building there for a water demand that happens once a day, twice a day. And people probably aren't going to get hot water before they turn off the sink because they have to run it for 1 to 3 minutes in order to get hot water in these situations to clear all of the line and heat up the pipe. So there are reasons in restaurants, for instance, where you have a long bar and you're trying to run hot water all the way to the other end. It might make sense to have just a tiny 2-gallon tank or a tiny on-demand. So an important distinction, look at the max amps column. This is where I focus because the power demand, as expressed in amperage here, is a determinative issue. As an example, I have a friend who has a 30 amp circuit going to a tiny house that he owns. And the electrician put in an electric on demand underneath the sink that they've never been able to turn on because they didn't have enough amperage supply. Sort of an absurd situation, but they could not turn it on even though they'd paid money to have it installed. So he either had to spend $1,200 to run a 60 amp circuit there, or he could spend a couple $100 and put in a small tank that was a 12 amp tank. So the Bosch, for instance, the next product down, second one, 12 amps. And that's what I've used in my tiny, I have 4 little tiny houses, 1 for my mom and 3 that we rent. And the shower can be met with the 7-gallon, 12 amp tank. A whole shower, that's enough hot water for 1 shower. So that's our tiny bathroom, is a 7-gallon tank. And it's a 2-gallon tank underneath the kitchen sink. And that's really because we just didn't have enough power. And also a heat pump water heater, like a big one, they don't make small heat pump water heaters yet. Yesterday we saw Jonathan Moscatello present on a 30-gallon potential product. But that product's in China. It's not here in the United States yet. So this is for tiny demands of water in which electric resistance might make sense. Now, heat pump water heaters, which have only maybe 1 or 2% of market share in water heater sales, I wanted to just sort of see, these are the products out there. Rheem, this is up here on top. A.O. Smith, we had Arthur Smith on today, still so tickled. Phoenix, which is a brand that's come into the United States relatively recently. I've put Rheem up on top because I've been trying to organize according to products that have low power demands. Oh, there's Arthur still there. Great. Hi, Arthur. So Rheem has come out with a 15 amp, 240 volt product. And it's the same one that they have that's 30 amps, but they have controls that say we only want 15 amps to be the maximum that can be used. This is important. I have an actual apartment complex where they don't have 30 amps at 240 volts for the water heater fuel switching, but they do for 15 amps. So the Rheem product is rising to the top, not because it's any more or less efficient, or it's the most important thing is that it matches the power supply. These are some details on if you're going to put a heat pump water heater in, you don't have to duct it. It can just sit there in your house, and it needs 700 square feet. They're good examples to put these in people's basements because you can pull heat from the walls, and you'll really never notice that your basement is 1 degree colder because of your heat pump water heater. It's just 1 degree difference it'll make. It's a tiny amount of heat that they'll be pulling in. But if it starts getting smaller than 700 square feet around it, like we have in apartment complexes where they just stick them in a tiny closet, then ideally you'd have a fully louvered door. Well, let's say you don't want a louvered door. Okay, well, then you might want to duct it. So you might want to bring air into it on the left-hand side and then just blow the air out of the top. Or you might want to fully duct it. So Shane presented earlier today on the ducted version where we're going to be pulling air out of the hallways, which is already conditioned with a heat pump. So it's going to raise the outside temperature from, say, 10 degrees Fahrenheit up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit with the right refrigerant, which is R410A for that job. It operates best in that bandwidth. And then we have a new refrigerant in the water heaters. And now you're using R134A, which would love to have 70-degree temperature air to work with to then raise the temperature of the water up to 125 to 135 degrees or so. And it'll keep its coefficient of performance, its efficiency, at close to 400%. Whereas if it was pulling from outside air, the efficiency would go down to 200% or even a little bit less than that before it shut off and went into resistance mode, which is 100% at about 35, 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So ducting, where you take a small amount of energy from inside the house that's been heated by a different heat pump, is a great strategy for cold climates. Putting that out there. We're doing a project in Truckee, for instance, where this might be the strategy that we use. Okay, a few other products for you to be familiar with. Stiebel Eltron, another 15 amp product, noteworthy. They have increased the gallons of storage of their smaller tank up to 58 gallons. That is to make sure that they have enough water for the first hour demand. It's called, when an imaginary hour in which people are just using water for the whole hour. You're asking, well, how fast can the tank respond to that? Like, how much water can it make? Well, a heat pump that only has 15 amps might not be able to make the regulated amount of first hour demand. So they went up to a 58-gallon tank. Just 8 gallons more gave them what not having power does. They use the thermal storage capacity of the tank to meet the peak load instead of bringing more power to meet the peak load. Different strategy, and it gives us 15 amps, so it can move into some developments. Below that, though, the Sandin. The Sandin, I used to think was a 15 amp product, but it's not. It's a 7.7 amp product that sits on a 15 amp circuit. But at 7.7 amps, it can share a circuit. We could plug it in, we could plug other things into that circuit. There's enough capacity there. It's only using half the circuit of a 15 amp circuit breaker. And that's pretty exciting for retrofits, to realize that you could plug it in essentially into the wall, and it's at 240 volts. So maybe the dryer could use it also if you had a 30 amp circuit. I'm trying to think what else at 240 volts you could combine with it. Maybe nothing, but still it doesn't use much power. That's the point. At maximum power, it's not much power. And within the power budget of an apartment or a tiny house or an existing house, it just doesn't have much power to it. This is an important thing to know. For no other reason than it doesn't use much power. And that's sometimes the limiting factor of a fuel switching retrofit. Down below that, oh, there's a question here. Does this Sandin have carbon dioxide refrigerant? Yes, it does. That is the sole carbon dioxide refrigerant tank type heat pump water heater out there at the moment. So it puts out water at 150 degrees Fahrenheit, by the way. And it's worth noting that it's got 15,400 BTUs that it puts out at peak, almost 4 times as much as the tanks above it at 4,000 BTUs per hour. So the Sandin reflects a jump up in capacity. And you see these products actually getting used in apartment complexes like small boilers, or combined to work as small boilers. The one on the bottom, this is what I have plugged into my own house, the Viken, and I got it because it had the smallest power demand of all, 2.06 up to 5.72 amps, so less than 6 amps. And I had a power constrained household, and I wanted to fuel switch immediately. So I was able to put this onto my dryer circuit. This shares the same circuit with my dryer, which is not normal, but they're both 220 volts. And this has such a tiny amperage demand, it won't blow the circuit even when the dryer is running. So, the putting this in did mean that I had to run a refrigerant line between the compressor and the tank, which is unusual. Usually, like the sand up above, that runs water from the compressor to the tank. Running refrigerant is more expensive. It takes a plumber and a mechanical engineer. It takes certifications. It takes oversight. It's dangerous, flammable chemicals. So what I found is that the VKIN was more expensive, like probably by $1,000 to have the technicians run refrigerant than if I'd done something else. But I didn't have the power to do something else. So this is actually cheaper than not getting to do it at all, which might be infinitely expensive. I really wanted to fuel switch my house. So the VKIN is a product that lives in Asia right now, but might come to the United States market. Okay, I want to make a case study because this is the end of the day. This is a real place, and they really did put in the sand-ins. Now, there's a little story here. Over in New York City, people are into cogeneration, where you burn gas to make electricity, and it incidentally heats hot water. And it's in that order. You make electricity. And how do you know that? Because in the summertime, people are still burning their cogeneration plants to make electricity and sell it to the grid in New York City, even though they have no hot water demand. Well, not none, but they're using it long after they've met their hot water demand. So I had a long running conflict really with the consultant working on this project who wanted to put in a cogen in. Now, I've shown you here in the table, look on the bottom where it says domestic hot water, name, copy of Lars, HH0500, that thing. Go over to the right, and you can see how it's negative 8.5% site energy. So this is worse than the existing 60% efficient boiler. And it does not get positive points on either site or TDV. A different option was replacing the windows. And then the third one was, which is what they did, they put in heat pump water heaters. And the heat pump water heaters passed code. It met the requirement that it be more efficient, whereas the cogen facility could not pass code. There was no way to get it through. This was sort of a tipping point for this particular consultant because they'd never done a heat pump central system before, and they were committed to cogen. This is like a half a year of arguing about, could they do it? No, you can't get it through the building code. But we want to anyway. Well, you still can't. And it's a bad idea. Look at what you could do with a heat pump. And they eventually did put in the heat pump water heaters. They did put in a solar array up on the roof. And now the water heating is 100% offset, as opposed to burning endless amounts of gas, even when the water heater doesn't need to be used as a water heater. So much better overall situation and more efficient. Show you another one. So this is a neat project. This won an International Design Award, Gold Nugget, Grand Prize. So the yellow arrow is pointing to the prize winning element. That's the compressors that heat all three of the buildings. If you look for white, that can tell you that's the building roof. So there's 3 buildings there and then surrounded by solar carports. So that set of compressors is heating and cooling water for space heating, space cooling, domestic hot water, and domestic chilled water. So you turn on the faucet and your water is chilled for you for all 3 buildings. The reason why that was done is not because it was more efficient, because it really wasn't. Not necessarily because it was cheaper, because that was kind of arguable. Maybe it was cheaper. It was done because the designers, the owner, the developer, they didn't want to change their floor plans a tiny bit. They wanted to continue using their plans that had a central system with no closets inside the apartments for individual systems. That's what they wanted to do. So we paired that desire with the right compressor system. And this is the first time that had been done, to our knowledge, in North America, where you had one set of compressors doing all 4 of those jobs. The product is from Italy, so it's definitely been installed in Canada. It's been installed elsewhere in Europe. Just hadn't been installed in the United States. And that's a big thing. Those kinds of products are here, like in the upper left-hand corner, NRK, the NRP. a Colmac you saw presented on earlier today by Sean Oram. And you also, I think, the Mayakawa Unimo, the EcoCute. These are big central heat pump systems that are worth considering. I think there might be one other or two others I don't have here, and I apologize for the ones I'm missing. But look, gigantic boxes of compressors. And they are that. It's not one compressor. It's multiple compressors that are coordinated. So smaller systems that are ganged up, just to be clear how these are mostly how they're working. Okay. Bronwyn, by the way, says, we need to ask heat pump manufacturers to make their compressors quieter if possible, as cities requiring decibel ratings and installation of these units at 20-foot setbacks off property line, which makes it very challenging. Bronwyn, I'm curious what the decibel limit is that we need to ask the HVAC manufacturers to install to, because I agree that's a real significant issue for getting fuel switching to actually happen, is noise. So in that vein, here are the noisiest of all the compressors. They're sometimes called window rattlers because they have non-inverter compressors. They just turn on and off, and they're not very well controlled. Their demand is just on, as opposed to matching what the real BTU needs are. And then they might have a thermostat control, but that turns them on and off. So there's different products here to note. There's like a 7,000 to 8,000 BTU window mounted version, and the electric resistance would kick in at 3,500 BTUs. Earlier we were talking about how there's only like 1 ton products or 3/4 ton products. A ton is 12,000 BTUs. 3/4 ton is 9,000 BTUs. So what I'm showing you here are products below 9,000 BTUs, which is generally the smallest you'd find in a ductless mini split. This is a ductless non-split. It's a unitary, 1 compressor in a box, not one sitting over here with a fan over there blowing heat. So, but they're important to note. This is a product that can fit into a lot of apartments, a lot of existing crummy small homes. This is an affordable, and I say affordable, like $600 to buy it. $1,800 total to install, as opposed to a ductless mini split, which is $5,000. $3,500 if you got a sweetheart deal with a friend, more like $5,000 in normal world, and as much as $9,000 in some markets to install a ductless mini split. So these products I'm pointing at are, you don't see me pointing. Imagine me pointing at them. These are even smaller, even cheaper, by maybe 1/3 as expensive. Now, I mentioned earlier the Arama. If there's a take-home message on this page, it's the top and the bottom. The Arama up here is really unusual. It's got an inverter. See that it says Mitsubishi? It's using Mitsubishi inverter-driven compressors in there, which makes it so much quieter. We're like 45 decibels. So Tom there saying typical local noise ordinances are around 45 decibels or 40 to 50, exactly. So this fits within that threshold of quiet, almost whisper quiet at 45 decibels. So the Arama can do that. Because it has an inverter, it operates at 30 or 40% more efficient. If it didn't have an electric resistance element in there, it would only operate at 6.83 amps at peak. But because they worry about icicle formation, they don't let the compressor go below freezing. It would create more condensate. And at that temperature, a freezing temperature, it would create icicles that could fall and kill somebody 2 stories or 3 stories down. The only limitation then is to get a condensate drain here. So there's a little plastic tube that takes the water away. And so there aren't icicles. That's not nothing. I'm just saying for New York City, where there's window air conditioners everywhere, dripping on you all summer long, if they were to replace these with in the same spot with a heat pump. So in the wintertime, it's also doing the heating job. if they just didn't have to deal with the drip, which no one in New York City likes walking around the street getting dripped on by, an air conditioner 4 stories up, but that's a common experience. That could be an all-in-one solution. Cold climate, so it can go down to -20 or something, heat pump that can fit into the existing amperage demands and and be really quiet and just get rid of the condensate. At the bottom, the Friedrich. That is a cool thing. That is, you cut a hole in the wall, you put that in the hole, and this has a ducted system. See that little screening system? That's a filter that you have in a ducted system. So apparently this is sort of the only product of its type where you would cut a hole in the wall and the compressor's sitting there and it's a powerful fan that blows energy through a filter into ducts. So I wanted you to see, like, look at that. This is something you can do, 10-story tall construction for a 3-bedroom apartment, and only have to cut a hole in the wall instead of having to build a patio to like sit a compressor down or try to run a refrigerant line 5 stories from the roof or something silly. You can just have everything, unitarily compressed in one little box. So that product exists, and it's got an inverter on it. So it's a cold climate appropriate. As an example, this is Ethan Terrace in Sacramento. You can see they had gas wall furnaces and they had existing PTACs. They had only 70 amps they had total. And the efficiency move, which also saved them a ton of money, was to get rid of the gas wall furnace and only use reversible Actually, they used a compressor with electric resistance element. But they're apartments, so they don't have a whole lot of heating in the wintertime. Not none, but not as much as you might expect from a home, small senior apartments. And so they did get a big efficiency gain out of this move. They also saved about $800 an apartment and not having to replace the gas wall furnaces, and all in. It was like rewiring, getting the better PTAC, taking out the gas wall furnace, taping it over, all in, saved them $800 per apartment for 92 apartments. Now, next thing you might not be familiar with is heat pump dryers. They use half the energy of a resistance dryer. They take twice as long. This is the most important thing for apartment complex developers, is they don't require a vent, which reduces a lot of design challenges and costs. Trying to get a vent horizontally through an apartment over to the wall to vent it out, like you're on the 8th story. That's not impossible, but it's hard. If you're doing it for dryers, sometimes you might like imaginarily like trying to go up or go around all sorts of obstructions. Just getting to put the dryer wherever it fits in an apartment without having to worry about a 4-inch duct is awesome. When you're worrying about how the dryer sucks so much energy through it out of your house and sends it outdoors, you have depressurization of your apartment and you're sucking all this nice conditioned air out of your apartment or house. So not having a vent that pulls air through it is also big energy savings and indoor air quality savings. So heat pumps, while slower, save a ton of energy and are better building. And this is what they look like any other dryer. Blomberg is the one that most people point at and say that's the best one out on the market. It has the best design. Miele, not sure how to say their name, but it's a popular one, but not very available in the United States. It's a European brand. Similar idea here, Bico, Asco. These are of limited availability in the United States. Whirlpool, however, Whirlpool has a very poor reputation. It's $900, but a lot of people have pointed out it has tons of issues with it. It was sort of first out of the gate, and so people started buying them, but that's a bleeding edge product, and you bleed on it. It's hard to change the filters. You have to remove the drum to get to the back of it. There's a whole bunch of error signs that come up frequently for silly little problems. People don't like them. So a couple comments here. Christine says, in Palo Alto, if the heat pump water heater will be installed in the exterior, the building owner must check with the planning department to ensure it is installed per setback requirements and that the unit itself will not exceed 6 decibels above the ambient noise, which is measured at the property line. Ah, okay. So once again, there's limitations here because of their sound as to where they can be installed and what kind of hassle you have to think about, like giving a decibel rating at the fence line. And Luke says, Sean, I tried doing the heat pump dryers in a multifamily and the plan checker still required the venting be installed to meet mechanical code. Why? Since there's no vent coming out of the machine. What would you connect to? So you're going to look up the specifics as a while ago, but he couldn't find any exceptions for heat pump dryers or condensing ones. Okay, that's really important for us to note that we have to make sure there's appropriate language. Luke continues, I talked with him about it. He said that the infrastructure needed to be installed, regardless of the equipment selected. Sounds like this person doesn't think so much as they just follow lists, because, I mean, you don't have to install plumbing to your bedroom just because. I mean, like, why would you do things that there's no need for? What do you, like, there's nothing on the other end. Yes, he is a very by the book, an outside plan check. Yep, worst case scenario. Sorry, Luke. Well, okay, so we know these products just came into the United States in 2014, just a few years ago when there's only the Whirlpool. And now to just, oopsie, say this again, the Blomberg is the one that I'd encourage people to examine. And that's it. That was the end of our presentation. Yay, yay. So just, if anyone would like to be unmuted, you can raise your hand or type in a little note into the chat, and I'll unmute you if you want to say hello. Okay, well, what time is it now? 4:07, I went 7 minutes over, okay. Just for giggles, I'm gonna unmute all of the panelists, all 7 of you, so. No, I won't do it, never mind. So Bronwyn, you're very welcome. Thanks for hanging out for the whole way through. It was great to see your comments coming in. Okay, I think then I'm just gonna, oh, Alice says, you're welcome, Michael. It could be plan checker needed to make sure he was covered. Yeah, this guy, the plan checker probably just had no idea and just required something, period. Well, you're welcome, everybody. I really appreciate it. I learned, I mean, let's just say Mozzie's revelation today that he'd fix this humongous issue in cost effectiveness analysis and code compliance and just building science, like having the software reflect reality. Huge! Whoa! So exciting. You're welcome, Kate. Okay. Well, yes, Alice. Yes, Mozzie's note was really fun. I guess I'm just going to speak out loud. A couple of things that I loved. I really enjoyed Antony's presentation, of course, because I'm a biologist and he taught me things I didn't know, and I just loved that. Bronwyn, yes, the slides are going to be, they're going to be overlapping with the PowerPoint presentation on YouTube. So you'll be able to watch them if that's what you're asking. If you'd like them sent to you as slides, just send us an email, and I've got all of them, obviously. Yes, the morning sessions will be posted on YouTube. And you're right, yesterday's started midway through Li Ling's presentation. And yeah, we've had some problems with the YouTube component of it. We had a couple problems with recording here and there, so it will not, there'll probably be a few different presentations that are corrupted, like thermal storage today. It'll be a little complicated to piece them together. You're welcome, Christine. but we'll do our best. So if anyone wants the slideshows sent to them, ask me. I'm more than happy to send them along. They'll be available on our YouTube site soon, so you can watch them again or send them to people. Any other notes I should share? Okay, well, next summer, come on up physically for the retreat. It's on July 26th and 27th. It's the last Thursday and Friday of the month. I'll type in my email address here, Alice, so that you can correspond with me. I'm Sean Armstrong, PM, as in project manager at gmail.com. So yeah, we have this lovely retreat on the ocean. Come on up, hang out. We take kayaks out and we dance, and we have a local guy who makes his own liquor with a horse-drawn farm. Kind of amazing. Oh yeah, and the massages on the beach. I usually have 2 or 3 massage therapists there to like help you out. You got a little stiff neck from your drive up.
Sunset walks and organic meals.
Oh yeah, the sunset walks and the all organic meals. We actually got the meals catered to us today. So we got these amazing dishes that Rachel brought over. Beautiful. There's purple potatoes on the bottom, then orange sweet potatoes, and then white potatoes, and then parsnip sauce on top. And it's just gorgeous, like this little multicolored layered cake of vegetable stuff, roots. So yeah, I hope you guys all make it up. It's on July 26th and 27th. I have these things on the last Thursday and Friday of January and July. So it's easy just to figure out last Thursday and Friday of January and July. You know what next year's will be if you look at the calendar. Yeah. Oh yeah, we have a website, zneretreat.com. I'll type that in. zneretreat.com is where you can go. Oh, Chelsea, thank you so much. You did a terrific job. Yeah, so go to zneretreat.com if you want to, see pictures and get a sense of what we're up to. Yes, Dietmar, we're going to have tons of fun in Santa Rosa. I'm coming down, and I hope to like social butterfly around all the tables and meet people, and I love that part of those conferences. Okay, take care. I'm gonna try to mute myself, and Amanda, could you do all the shutdown stuff so I don't mess it up? Okay, thanks everybody. I'm gonna mute it, and you have a great weekend, and let's all save the world together.